Okay, let us begin. It's nice to see everyone tonight. We're going to continue very interesting discussion that we've been having. I'm going through the halachos of Bein Adam L'Chavero, which means how do we treat other people. Um, so the Panini halacha goes through many of them. And what we last spoke about was, the topics we spoke about were you have to recha kamocha, loving your fellow. Why is that a central theme in Judaism? Um, Not you shouldn't hate somebody, but maybe sometimes it is appropriate if the person is a wicked person. And then we spoke about don't take revenge and don't bear a grudge. What's the difference between revenge and a grudge? Revenge is when you refuse to lend your friend an item because he gave it to you. Bearing grudges, you tell him, hey, I'm not like you. I'm gonna lend it to you, but you stick it to him when you do it, right? That's the difference between the two. And then we spoke about, you know, breaking up fights. That if you love your friends, and you don't want to fight, then there won't be any fights, right? It takes two people to fight. So if you're not interested in fighting, then you'll have a lot more peace. You'll have a lot more it'll be a lot easier for you in your life. So you should always try to not fight with people, even if they try to fight with you. Okay, so now we'll continue. So next topic is so to forgive, not to hate. So he says, Apima shalamanu, what we learned above previously, Bifnei Adam shenela v'nifka mechavero omdos rak shtei drachim. So someone insulted you. He says you have two options. Hachas ledaber im chaver kidei letakinis muvos v'zek muvon aderech hamudepes. He says best thing you can do, it's very difficult to do, but the best thing you can do, someone insults you and it's getting to you, is have a conversation with the person, right? Address it, do it in a respectful way. But that is the best thing to do if you can. Ulam kasher nireh shelo nitan liyashiv es hadurim. So imachaver no tra derech hashniya. Says, let's say you see the guy, you know him, he's not going to resolve this conflict with you. And to have a conversation with this person would just not be productive. So what should you do? So he says you have another option here. It's limchos lechlutin es ha'avon ve'asina me'alev. So what you can do is to try to completely erase this insult and the hatred that you feel to this person that insulted you from your heart. Kfi shekas Rambam, he says the Rambam actually says something like this. He says, Mi shechat alav chavero, ולא הראתה להוכיחו ולא לדבר לו כלום, מפני שהיה אחותה הדיו ביותר שהייתו דעתו משובשת. So let's say someone insulted you, but for whatever reason you don't feel comfortable, where he says you don't want to rebuke him or to speak to him. He says why? He says because the only reason the Rambam seems to be saying why you shouldn't rebuke him, which is meaning implying you should rebuke if you can. He says, but let's say the guy is he's like a little bit of a hediot. He uses that word hediot usually means like a fool. Or he says Oshaito Daito Mushbeshet, which means like the mind is a little bit distorted. Umachalo Belibo Velo Sotmo Velo Ochicho Haridu Midas Chasidus like Pita Torah Ela Shmata. He says, okay, so if you are not able to rebuke him, so what you can do is you can make up in your mind that you want to totally get rid of this hatred. So that he says is midas chasidus. It's this pious form of living. Kolomar kishein sikoi lepitron tov b'derech shel hadibur b'shalom v'reus mutar l'adam lemchos sina me'alev v'lishkoach me'ayinyan. It says, when you see that there's no chance there's for a good solution in the way of conversation, so the next best option is to just determine for yourself, easier said than done, basically to determine for yourself that I'm going to forget about this. It's not worth my time. I want to completely remove this from my heart. That is the second option. And the Panini Halacha just adds an interesting point. He says, "V'tzarich ladas shekasher masbir Rambam es hasiba lemnias hasicha and yanim." He says when the Rambam explains, why the reason why you're not able to rebuke, and he writes interesting language. He says because the guy was a fool, or he wasn't able to he wasn't able to his mind is a little bit distorted. So he writes, "Ain't kavana l'meshuga b'muvana regeli." It doesn't mean a meshuga, right? A meshuga, no. That's not what the Rambam's talking about. He says that you're dealing with a crazy person. That's not only what the Rambam means. It says, "El al pi Rambam gam adam sheba'ofen klali nechshev normali." So a guy who could be, as far as everyone knows, as far as everyone's concerned, he's a normal guy. Even בתחום יחסי האנוש, in regard to human relations, הוא טיפוס כזה שפוגע בחברו, ואינו מוכן להביע את האנשים שנבע ממנו, as if he's some guy who just, in regard to dealing with other people, he's impossible, hard to deal with, and doesn't try to understand people, even if he insults them. So in this respect, we would say that he's called a hedyot. He's called a fool. He's called someone with a distorted mind. And the Rambam would say, it's okay, so that person doesn't make sense to try to rebuke him and address it with him in a productive conversation. What you have to do is just set it in your mind, that I'm going to remove this hatred from me, and I'm not going to hate this person or let it bother me, and totally try to remove that. Again, easier said than done, but those are the two solutions, seemingly from the Rambam, if someone insults you, on how to deal with it. Okay, the next topic is Havidanis Chaver L'Chavsachos, which means you should judge your friend favorably. It says, "Mibein mitzvahs Torah ha'oskos biyachdim shebein adam l'chavero." It says, among all the mitzvahs that deal with relationships between man and his friend, yeshna mitzvah merkazit. So there's a central mitzvah that belongs, which is betzedek tishbor amisecha, which means in righteousness, betzedek, in righteousness, tishbot, you should judge amisecha, your fellow. Pershu chachamim shekavana ladonis esachaver chavsachos. So he says what that pasuk means is that you should always judge your friend favorably. Kfi she'amru b'mishnah Maseches Avos, like we say in Pirkei Avos, which many of us are doing at this time, right? Havedanes kol ha'adam l'chavsachos. You should judge every person favorably. Ve'akavana she'aroes chaveru oseh davar shnitan lepershi b'ofen chayuvi shnitan lepershi b'ofen shlali. So he says mitzvah lepershi b'ofen chayuvi. So he says, let's say your friend does something, and you have two ways of looking at it. You could look at it in a positive form, or you could look at it in a negative form. So there's a mitzvah from the Torah to decide in your brain, decide to yourself that this person, he's probably doing something okay. He's probably doing the positive thing, and to judge the person favorably. It's a mitzvah. It's a pasuk. B'tzedek tishbor amisecha. וכן השומע על חברו סיפור שאפשר לפרשו לפרשו ולחיוב ולשלילה mitzvah parsha open chiyuvi. He says not only if you see something and you can judge it, but even if you hear something about somebody, and there's two ways that you could look at it. So he says the mitzvah from the Torah to judge it, to decide that you're going to believe that it was done in a positive manner and not through the negative interpretation of what could have happened. It says the kol ma'isa she'adam oseh אפשר לתת כמה משמעויות. אפשר לפרש באופן חיובי, ולמצוא בצדדים היפים והכוונות הטובות, ואפשר גם למצוא את ההפך. He says every single thing that a person does, these are always different ways you can interpret an action. You can look at it through the good sides, and probably this guy had good intentions, or there's ways to look at it in the opposite. He says, אפילו למעשה של הצדיק ביותר, אפשר להטיל לפרש שלילי. He says, even if you have a tzaddik, a complete tzaddik, so there are ways to look at his actions negatively. He says, Hooray, I'll give you a proof. Afilu es ma'asav shel Moshe Rabbeinu, alav hashalom. He says, even Moshe Rabbeinu, Perish Korach bofen sheli. Korach looked at his actions and he interpreted them negatively. V'chashav shekol kavanaso ha'ili shtarer ala am. He thought all Moshe was trying to do was rule over the nation. So even Moshe Rabbeinu, people could interpret his actions negatively. He says nikach. He says another example. The dugma adam hametapel ba'orav zakenim. We say a person is taking care of his elderly parents. So he says there's two ways you could look at what this person's doing. Efsholomar says alav kama yafe hu mechabed orav. You could say, wow, what amazing person. He's honoring his parents. He's taking care of his parents. It's one way to look at it. After Gamlomer, Badeshu Mitapa Yafe, Ray Munyan Birusha. You could say, no, this person just interested in getting a large inheritance, and that's the reason he's taking care of his parents. So every single thing that person does, there are ways to look at it, positive and negative. And he says the Gabe Kozeh. So the Torah tells us, Mora Torah B'tzedek Tishbod Amisecha. You need to judge favorably. You need to judge your fellow favorably. Inkan Isam Nus B'Tadam Hashalim Minakavanos Arosh Shekayamus. He says it's not that the Torah is telling us. This is an interesting point. He says not that the Torah is telling us that we need to ignore negative negative interpretations that exist. He says that's not exactly what the pasuk is saying. It's saying Ella yesh po hadgeshes atov ve'achiyuv. Says no. It's rather the emphasis of the pasuk is focus on the good, focus on the positive. He says b'chol ma'isa, in every single action, kima yeshnan gam kavanos tovos gam ros. There's good and there's always bad. Everything that a person does is probably influenced by multiple factors, not just one. There's hashayla hi ma'ikar. The question is, what is really what's the main thing? What's the main thing driving the person? Hayim tov or ra? Is it the good drivers or the bad? Torah meretz shatov huayikar. The Torah is telling you that no, it's the good. It's always the good, which is the larger force that's just driving his actions at the end of the day. Kol adam benishma. So every person in his neshama, in his soul, bepnimo, so his inner being who tov is good. Uvechetino sav upachos yoter tov upachos tov. And he says that in the outer bit, what we can see, it's always a little bit less good. V'hasheilai ma'ikar. The question is, what is the main point? What is real? Haneshama pnimis, the inner soul, or achitzonis, or the outer being. Bazeh shadam danes chavir lakav stachos ukovea shehaneshama Torah yikar adam. So by judging other people favorably, so we determine for ourselves when looking at others that it's the neshama, the pure neshama is the ikr. It's the main point. It's the main driver of a person. So then he expands on this. He says, "Kifi shalamanu b'asher nitan lefarish be'ofen haguniyo tamaisa l'tzad tov u'tzad ra." Says, like we taught above, like we just spoke about, that whenever there's a logical way to interpret something good or bad, mitzvah l'perish should be open chiyuvi. It's always a mitzvah to interpret it in a positive manner. Shenemar b'tzedek tishbod amitecha. It's the same pasuk we're quoting. You should judge your fellow favorably. Aval kasher ma'aseh nireh ra. Says, what if the action just looks like a terrible action, and he says, "Val pia hagyon kasher l'perish should be open chiyuvi," and using logic, it's just really tough to interpret in a positive manner. He says, if that's the case, then there actually is no obligation to judge that favorably. He says, but I'm going to limit that. He says, that's only true about someone who's a moderate person. It's not talking about a tzaddik and not talking about a wicked person. It's a hard it's I'm just stopping to read inside for 1 second. It's a hard line to balance. When is it an action where you're able to say, oh no, I know for sure that that's a bad action. I don't know. Each person needs to. That's why you need a brain. You need to think on your own. Is this something which I can't judge favorably for? And is there also, you have to think about, is there a reason why I shouldn't judge favorably here either? Which we'll get to. It says, but all that's talking about like a normal person. It says, let's say you see a person who he's very careful. He has a God-fearing person. He's very careful to keep Torah mitzvos. I feel him also ma'asav shenira panav k'ma'aseh ra. So even if that person does something which looks bad, calls man shenitan le'pershav ofen chiyuvi. I feel even if you have to like twist yourself to think of, oh, maybe there's some reason why what he's doing is good. He says, since the person is a good person, he's a tzaddik, so then probably it was actually something good. And our twisted, maybe possible explanation is probably correct. ואם דאנס הצדיק כף חובה, לאו אמרו חכמים, החושד בקשרים, לא כבגופו. He says, and if you judge a tzaddik negatively, so the Gemara says that one who suspects people who are really innocent, he's actually struck in his body. So the Gemara brings many stories where at first glance the actions of a person looked really bad. Says, yeah, but what happened in the story is that person was able to judge those actions, which on the first glance looked bad, and they judged it positively. But so, in the end, the positive interpretation was correct. And the Chachamim say about this, so if you judge, this is always a very powerful line. If you judge other people favorably, so you will be judged favorably in heavens as well. If you judge others favorably, then God is going to judge you favorably too. And I think we all would like that, for God to judge us favorably. And so the way to do that is to judge others favorably down here. The more righteous a person is, the more we need to strive to judge that person favorably. He says, and that's why Miriam, the Neviah, alav that she was punished because she didn't judge her brother Moshe favorably. He says, Rasha, he says, when you're speaking about an evil person, again, I don't know how you're going to know someone is an evil person, but if you know a person's evil, says, even if you could interpret his actions favorably, if you have someone who you know is wicked, then even his actions that look good, you should interpret them that they're bad. ועליו נאמר כי יכנין קולו אל תאמין בו כי שבע תועבות בליבו. Okay. He says Ella, he says that but what's key is שצריך להיזהר מאוד שלא לקבוע מתוך שנאה שהאדם מסוים הוא רשע וממילא צריך לדון אותו לכף חובה. He says don't just say, oh, he's my enemy, he's probably a wicked person. You have to be careful about that. Okay, so in order to be careful about that, you have to strengthen yourself about loving your neighbor, like yourself. Okay, last topic that we'll speak about for tonight, which is you can't talk about Bein Adam L'Chaver and not mention this, and this is Lashon Hara. He says, "Ha'isur shulai mivate yoser mikos hayachzim atkinim shetzrichem lishor Bein Adam L'Chaver piatora hu etz Lashon Hara." He says the prohibition, which perhaps is most apparent in proper relations that a person needs to have in order to prevail over Bein Adam L'Chaver, how he acts with his fellow through the Torah, is the Isser, the prohibition on Lashon Hara. He says, Merkazio, so the centrality, Shal Isser Zeh, Gdol Kol Kach is so big, Ad Shepamim, Rabo Tamusag Sinas Chinam, Makbil Isser Lashon Hara. He says, this centrality of Lashon Hara is so strong that many times Lashon Hara, speaking badly about a person, is paralleled with Sinas Chinam. What does Sinas Chinam mean? It means hating your friend. It says Lashon Hara, speaking badly, is basically parallel to hating others. Shkein Amru Chachmenu Zechron V'Racha. He says, what do the Chachamim tell us? She'itzer Lashon Hara shakol kineged shlosh aviros tachmurus biyoser. He says the Isser of Lashon Hara is equivalent to the 3 cardinal sins of Avodah Zarah, Gilu Arayos, Shvichas Damim. These are Avodah Zarah, Gilu Arayos, and illicit relations, and Shvichas Damim, killing. And the Gemara tells us that those three averos, one person needs to be so careful to give up his life rather than do them. So if Lashon Hara is equivalent with that, with these 3 averos, it seemed that is also something that we should give up our lives before speaking Lashon Hara. The Yeser al Kain, Bayis Rishon Nechrav Ba'avon Avodah Zarah, says the first base of Mikdash was destroyed because of Avodah Zarah, Gil Arayis V'Chos Damim. V'ilu Bayis Sheni Shara Yom Omed Becharvono Charav Babos and Eschina Velashon Hara. He says the Gemara in Yuma tells us the second base of Mikdash was destroyed because of sinas chinam, hating others, Velashon Hara, and speaking badly about others. Okay, this is important to understand. Lashon Hara. We'll always get it confused, but you have to know there are three separate categories in Lashon Hara. Isser Lashon Hara mitzchalik l'shoshach chalakim. There are three categories of Lashon Hara. Number one, Rachilus. It's the first category. Rachilus, Lashon Hara. Lashon Hara is number two. Yotza Shemra, Moti Shemra is number three. So Rachilus, Lashon Hara, and Moti Shemra. There are three categories under like a broad category of Lashon Hara. But the second one, only the second category is really Lashon Hara, but people just refer to all three as Lashon Hara. Okay, so let's go through all three of them. So number one, Rachel. What's a Rachel? What does it mean? So Rachel literally translates, I think by many, like in an article probably, they'll translate it like this, to be a peddler. A peddler. So he says, what does that mean? So this person goes like a peddler from one person to the next. He says, this person said this about you. And this person said this about you. He says, MS, he says, even though what he's saying might be true, and there's not necessarily intention to damage a person or to degrade him. He says, he says, these type of speaking, to just speak about other people. This person said this about this person said this about you. He says that's just going to cause conflicts. So he says that's number one. A peddler. I mean, just speaking about other people is never a good idea, or about what other people said about another person. Never good idea. There's a good quote that I heard, that what the quote is, one nice thing about a arrogant person is he never speaks badly about other people. He only speaks about himself. It's a nice quote. Anyways, he says, so that's category number one. It says Avar Chomer Yoser Lashon Hara. And something more a worse sin is the second category, Lashon Hara. And what's Lashon Hara? Says that's someone who speaks badly, things that are true about a friend. Kolomar ina iser bezeshu mishaker. The prohibition of Lashon Hara is not that you're lying. Is that you're speaking negative things about a person. Meaning, a lot of times people say, oh, like, stop speaking Lashon Hara, and you're like, oh, but it's true. So I'm sorry to tell you, but Lashon Hara, the definition of Lashon Hara is things that are true. Things that are true that are bad about another person. So being true does not make it Lashon Hara. It actually, not it being true actually puts it into the category of Lashon Hara. Okay, what if it's not true? What if it's worse, and you're speaking badly about a person and it's just simply not true? So now you're the worst of the worst. This is the worst category. This is Moti Shemra. That's someone who tells lies that are degrading to a person about another person. B'yeshno musag nosaf balacha. He says, and then there's something else. There's something else besides these three types of lashon hara, three types of evil speech. He says there's something addition. Who baal lashon hara? This is someone who's called a baal, a person, like an owner of lashon hara. This is his whole being. He says kiman kol adam. He says, unfortunately, it happens. People fail. And we sometimes speak badly about other people. This is for some people, this is what they do. They just speak lashon hara. They speak badly about another person. Says their whole joy in life, they get from lashon hara, from rechilas, from speaking about other people. Kol mi Sharek Efshar. Lahem Karu Chachamim Balei Lashon Hara. So Chachamim call these people Balei Lashon Hara, people of Lashon Hara. The Ein Zerak Bitoy Ba'ama. He says this is not just like this like category. Ela Pasuk Rambam. The Rambam says the halacha She'ein Lador B'Shchenu Simadam Mishubal Lashon Hara Someone who's a Baal Lashon Hara, someone who's this is his entire being. You shouldn't sit near him, you shouldn't dwell near him, or even listen to his words. And then finally, this last section here, um, he's going to talk a little bit. He says, Mesupar Rabbi Alexandri, Shenichnas La'ir Achas, Ve'echres Sheish Lo Tufa. So there's a story about Rabbi Alexandri. I Googled him. He seems to be like he was someone in the times of maybe the Gemara. Not exactly sure. He says, but he says the story is that he walked into a town and he says, I have an announcement. I have a special medicine. He says, anyone who takes this medicine, who wants it, is going to have a long life. He's going to live a long time. So what happened? Everyone crowds around him and everyone wants to see what's this beautiful medicine, what that's going to give them a long life. So he says the following. He says, Mi ha'ish hachafetz chaim ohev yamim liras tov. He says, who's the person who wants to live a long life and wants to see good? Zor lishoncha meiraus v'secha medaber mirma. He says it's a person who's able to guard his tongue from speaking badly and his lips from speaking badly. So he says this pasuk, which is in Tehillim, which we say on Shabbos and davening, says pasuk maftiach arichos yom l'chol adam sheyinsor es lashon midaber ra chavero. Pasuk guarantees a long life to someone who's careful not to speak badly about another person. If you want to live a long life, don't speak Lashon Hara. That's what he says. He says, he says to demonstrate this. So let me tell you about this person, this great rabbi, Rabbi Yisrael Meir Miradin. This is Rabbi Yisrael Meir Kagan, who's of course known as the Chavetz Chaim. So he says Rabbi Yisrael Meir, no Lifnei Yosef Meir's Chamishim Shani. He was born more than 150 years ago. He says Kshaya Be'erach Begil Arbaim. This is when he's around 40. Nidbo Libo Likum La'ara Es Am Yisrael Shmir Salashon. So he decided it was his mission that he is going to make sure the nation of Israel is careful about their speech. L'shem kach uchiber sefer arach umakif adinei lashon hara v'achilas. So he decided he wanted to codify the laws of lashon hara and achilas, and he called the sefer Chafetz Chaim, someone who desires life. Hashem pasuk shezachar. This is based on the pasuk which we just mentioned, right? Mi ha'isha Chafetz Chaim, who's the person who desires a life. So we call the sefer Chafetz Chaim, one who desires life. Which this is the one that guarantees a person a long life if he's careful about speaking badly. So he says, Rabbi Yisrael Meir lo istapik bechibur sefer bavad el af hayan nose mafitza, because Israel, he said, not only did he write it, he distributed among Israel. And he kept speaking to his talmidim about lashon hara. He says, Lachar Mikain Od he spake Rabbi Yisrael Meir Lahusif Lachaber Sfarim Chashuvim Meod. He says, and he continued to write Sfarim, Mishnah Brura, which is this halacha sefer on Shulchan Aruch, which is pretty well used today. He says, but Ulam Sefer Rishon Chachiber, the first sefer that he wrote, Behu Asher Pirsem Shmo Ba'olam, which made him famous, is Chavetz Chaim. Vayom, he says, Ein Adam Shekar Rabbi Yisrael Meir B'Shmo. Nobody calls Rabbi Yisrael Meir by his name. If they want to quote him, people refer to him as the Chavetz Chaim. And even his life, he lived with this. So he says the question is, what age do the Chavetz Chaim die at? If the pasuk guarantees that he's going to have a long life, someone who is careful about this, and who could have been more careful than the Chavetz Chaim himself? So did he live a long life? So he says I'm not going to give you exact details. I'm going to tell you the story. He says Begil Tishem, says when Chavetz Chaim turned 90 years old, so he gathered up all his grandchildren and his talmidim, and he said to them as well. He says, he says, normally we're not birthday people. We don't celebrate birthdays. But this birthday, 90 years old, I'm going to celebrate. Because I want to publicize the fulfillment of the promise of the pasuk. Shechol mishi yishmer es pei v'lashono. Anyone who's careful about his speech, yarach yamim, will have a long life. La'achar mikein himshach v'chai od kama shanim. He continued to live even after the 90th birthday. V'niftar b'chav dalad elul tafresh sadi gimel. He says, this debate, was he 93, was he 97? Okay. וכן נשארנו דמות של החפץ חיים, סמל של איש המופיע בתור רב ישראל אשר הסכים את רעיונותיו בחייו ובמותו. He says, and he remained the symbol of a person who loves Israel, who fulfilled his ideas in his life and in his death. So we see from the life of the Chafetz Chaim, and that was, I think he died in like 19, let's look it up. I think he died, what did he say? 1838 to 1933. I don't know how normal it was to live that long of a life at that time. He lived to 95. So my father said lived to 95. So in between 93 and 97, right there. But yeah, we should take the inspiration from the life of the Chafetz Chaim. Understand that if we careful about our speech, we should be zocha, we should merit to have a long, impactful life.